eyes wide open on this one. In the 1980s, hysteria broke out that was named the Satanic Panic. During this time, adults figured out that their children was being sexually abused, mentally abused, and physically abused. But if you listen to everybody talk about it, they make it seem like a lot of people went to jail for nothing. That there wasn't hard evidence, and trust me, there was hard evidence. It's just the powers that be was in the midst of all of this. In the Bible, it says 2 witnesses can establish the truth. There's over 100 kids that testified to being molested, physically abused, or mentally abused, being parts of rituals and all.
When you think about activities commonly seen at a preschool, things like naps, games, and Play-Doh sculptures probably come to mind. One thing that definitely would not is boiling and eating babies. At least, not unless you grew up in the 1980s, when reports of daycare centers engaging in satanic rituals were widely circulated and readily believed. People went to jail for years based on little more than a widespread conviction that the devil's minions were corrupting and sometimes devouring our children. It was a mass hysteria that grew to include Oprah, the Smurfs, and even McDonald's. It's the story of Satanic Panic.
In the 1980s, you would often sit to eat breakfast looking at missing children. So for those who try to act like this isn't real, I have no ear for you, because it was happening. Approximately 840,000 people go missing every year. FBI states that 85 to 90% of these are children. So you have to open your eyes. This been going on since back then. Now, it was 500,000 every year to around 2012 or so. So let's talk about Adam Wash. On July 27th, him and his mother were in Sears store. Now, he had seen some older kids playing video games and asked to watch them. She said, go ahead. This wasn't a big deal at this time. So she walked away, came back 10 minutes. He was gone. After this, it was totally different. Everybody was aware of watching your kids. His remains was found 2 weeks later. His father ended up creating the National Center for Missing Children and even went on to star and create America's Most Wanted. That's the man who does America's Most Wanted. He did that because he was missing his child. Now let's talk about Johnny Gosh. He was doing his paper route in West Des Moines, Iowa. This was 1982 when he was taken and stuffed inside of a car. His family called the police, but back then, a child had to be missing 72 hours. You talk about inside job. This is the kicker. In 1997, Johnny's mother, Noreen, says as an adult, Johnny showed up at her apartment, said he was on a run, he was kidnapped, and took her to a sex ring, and he managed to escape. He periodically dropped pictures to his mother of his captivity. Now, y'all don't believe this is real? They cover this up because this goes to the highest of the highs and to the lowest of the lows.
Satanic Panic was a phenomenon that swept North America. And at the height of the craze, you basically couldn't open up the newspaper or turn on the news without hearing about subliminal messages hidden in rock music, pagan symbols and cartoons, or criminal trials involving teachers engaging in human sacrifice.
To properly understand the atmosphere that's going on, you have to go back to the 60s with movies like Psycho, which was huge in pop culture. Horror movies, mummy movies, monster movies has always been real big in pop culture, but it started getting a little different with movies like Rosemary's Baby and Psycho. It started getting a little deeper into witchcraft, into Satanists. You move up a little bit and to the Amityville Horror, and to the Exorcist, you see what leads the way to the Satanic Panic that happened in the 1980s. This is when technology was on a rise. Yet there was still enough of the old world for them not to know that their tricks will catch them up.
A psychiatrist named Lawrence Pazder detailed what he claimed was the true story of patient Michelle Smith, an adult who underwent over 600 hours of hypnosis to recall long repressed memories of being involved in a satanic cult as a child. With shocking stories of abuse, sacrifice, and demonic rituals, Michelle Remembers caused a stir and was widely seen as a legitimate chronicle of a horrific underground movement.
Now, I believe that this was all real. Now, Miss Oprah Winfrey was not as big as she is now. And she did a show. You know, she was big, but not as big as she is now. She did a show about satanic worship, only to discover that many people believe she participated in it, including myself.
But there was a problem. While Pazder insisted Michelle Smith's memories were genuine, they didn't stand up to closer scrutiny. She said rituals took place in a cemetery in Victoria, Canada in the 1950s, but no residents ever reported anything strange happening there. She also said priests in this cult had to lop off a finger.
Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Every so often, it was the 50s. It was some stuff going on with kids in the 70s, then the 80s. Every so often, this stuff breaks through the cracks and they sweep it back under the rug. They get by with a little help from their friends. Story kind of sounds like Pizzagate, but the difference is hundreds of kids claimed that this happened.
The most common myths during the height of the Satanic Panic was the idea that family-friendly corporations were secretly in league with the devil. These urban legends actually predate Michelle Remembers in some cases, and the earliest victim may have been Ronald McDonald. In October 1978, McDonald's felt compelled to publicly announce that franchise founder Ray Kroc was not a financial supporter of the Church of Satan. The story started when McDonald's got a letter from a woman in Ohio asking why Kroc donated 20% of the company's profits to a satanic cause.
Mickey D's was accused of many conspiracies. No other company has as much conspiracies as McDonald's. And you have to really check and center yourself around these conspiracies. Because whenever there's so many conspiracies, then usually that means it's a government agent. Now, some of these conspiracies have found out to be true. Like, for instance, the monopoly was fake. And let's not ever forget this.
News 8's Carlos Amezco was among the first reporters on the scene. He's been providing live reports for the past 5.5 hours. We go to him now for his report on what happened. Carlos?
Marty, as we arrived shortly after the incident began, the scene was one of absolute confusion. Shots were ringing out. The nightmare was unfolding.
Make sure you approach from the south, and the CP is at 300 west. The shooting suspect is inside the McDonald's. He is contained, moving around in there. Still shots being fired.
He entered the facility heavily armed, immediately started shooting everybody. And the customers that were inside the restaurant had absolutely no chance to escape. Oh, God. These images are more of war than of a small fast food restaurant in San Isidro. Yet it was a local man dressed in battle fatigues who declared, "I have killed 1,000, I'm gonna kill 1,000 more." 41-year-old James Huberty reportedly walked into the restaurant carrying a semi-automatic rifle and 2 other weapons, enough ammunition to last 2 hours. Witnesses inside said he fired wildly into the unsuspecting crowd gathered for a quick evening meal. He fired through windows, hitting people in the street. He fired at men, women, children, and babies. One officer said it looked like a mass execution.
Even as I was a kid, there were a lot of conspiracies and rumors about Mickey D's. The first one I remember was people saying that they had magnet in their food. It was around 82, and I remember a few different people had said that they got McDonald's and they had magnets in the food. From that to them cooking babies, them cooking homeless people, it's endless.
Throughout the 1980s, a number of children's characters were accused of being in league with the devil, or at least with what some called heathen gods. Thundercats was purportedly intended to promote Eastern mysticism. The He-Man and Snake Mountain playsets supposedly invoked demonic imagery because kids could use a microphone to deepen their voices and pretend to be evil. The Smurfs were blue and had black lips. That could be construed as being corpse-like, making the Smurfs members of the undead. But no toy or game took more of a beating than Dungeons & Dragons. First released in 1974, the tabletop game put players in the roles of heroes and sorcerers using magic spells to face off against various monsters. For those who believed popular culture was steeped in satanic messaging, this was all the proof they needed. The controversy grew even stronger in 1979, when a 16-year-old Michigan State University college student named James Egbert disappeared. Friends told authorities he was a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, which somehow led to investigators becoming convinced he had gotten lost in the underground steam tunnels near the college after getting too immersed in a gaming session. The truth wasn't quite so sensational, but it was tragic. Among other things, Egbert was apparently stressed over having advanced so far in school at such a young age. He was dealing with personal problems and had decided to run away. Sadly, he died by suicide not long after. But the story of his becoming obsessed with the game persisted, and a made-for-television movie called Mazes and Monsters was produced in 1982 that kept the narrative alive. Inspired by the Egbert case, it was one of the first starring roles for an aspiring actor named Tom Hanks. Parents grew so concerned over Dungeons & Dragons that one even formed a group called BAD, or Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons. You've probably heard of the idea that certain songs played backward in a technique known as backmasking reveal subliminal messages. Rock music was especially susceptible to those accusations in the 1980s, when bands like Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones were charged with hiding their support of the devil in their records. The whole concept of satanic messages being audible when music is played backward probably has roots in the work of Aleister Crowley. The infamous early 20th century occultist advised that you could train yourself to think backwards by, among other things, learning to speak backwards, and even listening to phonograph records in reverse. In the case of one band, the possibility of hidden lyrics led to a lawsuit. In December 1985, two friends, 18-year-old Raymond Belknap and 20-year-old James Vance, ended a night of drinking by agreeing to a suicide pact. Belknap died, while Vance was left with severe injuries. Vance's parents sued the band Judas Priest for $6.2 million because both young men had been fans of their music, and rumors persisted that hidden messages like "Do It" and "Let's Be Dead" were buried in songs like "Better by You, Better Than Me." As silly as some of these examples are, Satanic Panic also led to some very serious and life-altering consequences. In 1983, one mother accused an employee of the McMartin preschool in Manhattan Beach, California, of molesting her child, triggering a massive investigation that went back 2 decades and eventually grew to include 7 employees of the preschool and 360 children who said they had been abused. As the investigation continued, the claims of the children grew increasingly bizarre. Some said a teacher flew through the air. Others claimed they were forced to witness the sacrifice of other children. At the heart of this sensational story was Children's Institute International, a child advocacy group that was responsible for interviewing kids about their traumatic experiences. While their approach to interviewing the children was not ostensibly intended to be coercive, many of the kids heard declarative statements like, We know what happened, just tell us, and felt compelled to repeat or make up stories.
Now, I believe the Satanic Panic of the 1980s was real. All you really got to do is look at the result of what's going on today with the LGBT terrorist attacks. Not only was the Satanic Panic real, but they have won, and they are winning now. You realize we live in a place, a country, where you can't state a fact. You can't even say what you believe. I personally believe God decides who a man and woman is. But that can get you in trouble just to say that today. At least get your videos ahead. All that happened in the 80s led to what's going on today. And the pedophilia rings that's been uncovered years after years after years. Though people tried to say that it was all a figment of our imagination. But now we see it from the Catholic Church to the Boy Scouts, that this is a wicked nation ran by wicked people, and that's why the laws for pedophiles are so low in case they get caught. Why would you not believe the children? You tell me 360 children, and that's weird to me that it's stuck on that number, 360. But that many children remembered something that wasn't real? All of them?
Thank you to Satan for giving me inspiration on how to play this role.